Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking about another deck tech thingy, and we got Pauper today. We've got Pauper up on the docket, and what is it? We're going to be talking about Boros Bully. That's right, a sweet red-white style of deck. Should be pretty interesting, pretty cool. Lots of sweet cards I played back in the day, so let's get into it. All right. Yeah, this deck is really awesome, and the reason I even wanted to get into Pauper like years ago was that I saw that there was decks playing Prismatic Strands as well as Battle Screech, which are like some of my favorite white cards ever because they're basically card advantage. They're kind of sneaky. They do all sorts of good things. Really play into like what white wants to do. For example, Battle Screech is really great with stuff like Glorious Anthem, and so I had like an Odyssey block constructed deck, playing a bunch of mono white cards like Suntail Hawk and um, the I can't remember what this guy's name was. It's the 1 mana 1/1 that tapped to return like 2 cards to their hand to destroy an attacking creature or something. That thing was sweet. That thing's actually pretty sweet. But yeah. Anyways, a lot of cool stuff. Really liked Odyssey block and Judgment actually was a pretty sweet set. Like all of those cards I had just mentioned, well, except for something like, the Divine Sacrament, right, which was from like Odyssey. A lot of really cool stuff in Judgment and just Odyssey block in general for like white decks, which is super cool. Like white had a ton of good stuff, like Glory and cool stuff like that. Big fan of Glory. Valor, Valor hasn't really exactly found his place. Pretty narrow, right? So you need to you need to have a planes, you need to have a way to get into the yard, and creature combat needs to be important, and yeah, that's not good. Glory was awesome. I mean, Glory was freaking sweet. That is a card that I hope I can play with again at some point. I really need to try and remake that Odyssey block constructed deck. Man, that thing was awesome. Anyways, a lot of those really cool cards are available in this deck, and we're definitely playing them because they are sweet. And this deck, as you can tell, a lot more expensive cards, right? So it's going to be a slower, more mid-range style of just like a deck, not a sort of Zerg, white weenie, kiki kind of thing. So yeah, lots of good stuff going on here. So let's take a look at the deck list. All right, look at this freaking deck. It is super sweet, and this is fairly typical for this kind of deck. You're not really going to see a ton of variation in it, at least at the moment. So again, a lot of these creatures are, well, we'll get into some of the creatures specifically in general, but again, card advantage, Thrabin Inspector, Thrabin Inspector. I never thought about how to pronounce that. Well, anyways, Thrabin Inspector makes a clue. Great. Who doesn't love clues? Squadron Hawk, of course, card advantage, right? Gives you a sort of ancestral recall kind of thing. So that's real cool. Got Guard of the Guild Pact and Palace Sentinels and stuff like that, and we'll get into a little bit why those are so good. Of course, the aforementioned Battle Screech and Prismatic Strands, and another one of my favorite cards, especially during Innistrad Draft, which I unfortunately haven't played enough of. I mean, I don't know if you could ever play enough Innistrad Draft, the original one, which was just awesome. Rally the Peasants. Rally the Peasants. So that's a good one. One of my favorite removal spells, Journey to Nowhere, just cheap, no frills, no oopsies daisies, just kill stuff pretty easily, and not a ton of enchantment removal. Most of it specifically aimed against artifacts, of course, especially Affinity. We'll have to see how the meta shakes out, but Journey to Nowhere, one of the premier removal spells for white. Really good stuff there. Mana base, nothing wonky, and the sideboard, of course, we will get to. Okay, All right, so this is of course all taken from MTG Goldfish. Wow, what a nice site. But it actually has the percentage of these cards in particular decks. So for example, we have Thraben Inspector. Again, everyone plays 4. Same thing with Squadron Hawk. More or less the same thing with Seeker of the Way. And then Palace Sentinels and Guardian of the Guild Pact are around 2 copies apiece. A little bit less for Guardian of the Guild Pact, but yeah, like I said, Thraben Inspector, Thraben Inspector. I'm just gonna go back and forth. I guess it doesn't really matter. I mean, she looks like my grandma. That looks like she just found some poop in her yard or something. I don't know. Anyways, creating a clue, that's great. Excellent mana sink. 1 mana, 1/2. I guess okay blocker. But creating a clue, drawing a card, pretty good for a 1-drop. Squadron Hawk, of course, 2 mana, 1/1 evasive flyer, as well as getting you 3 more cards. Again, this deck is more focused on card advantage than just pure outright aggression. And of course, we have Seeker of the Way. This card is pretty sweet. This can be sort of difficult for some of the aggressive decks to deal with, more aggressive decks, because of course, well, the prowess and lifelink, so it gets bigger. And with some of our other spells like Rally the Peasants, of course, this will make it very big and lifelinky, and that's pretty sweet. Pretty sweet against aggressive decks, just a solid bear with some good abilities, so that's sweet. Palace Sentinels, 4 mana, 2/4, about the most annoying thing to attack into. I'm not, not a big fan of 2 mana, 2/4s on the opposing side of the field. Always feels like they're impossible to kill, in a reasonable time frame. But this one's even worse because it gives you the Monarch, so you have this big body to defend the Monarch, and anything that attacks into it you can kill pretty easily or just stall forever. So, and of course it can attack in certain situations, when you don't need to protect the Monarch. So yeah, this is a really sweet card. You only play 2 because 4 mana 2/4s aren't particularly good by themselves, but 4 mana 2/4s that give you the Monarch the first time you play them, pretty strong, pretty strong. And of course, Guardian of the Guild Pact. Well, there's a ton of decks that play a lot of monocolor removal, and that's most of the removal. So outside of counter magic or maybe sacrifice effects sometimes, Guardian of the Guild Pact is pretty tough to kill. This is also similar to Palace Sentinels, where it's just going to be harder to kill. Well, really hard to kill in the case of Guardian of the Guild Pact. So it's a decent attacker, but it's a very good blocker as well. So that's pretty sweet. I mean, you look at a lot of decks and it's just like monocolor removal as far as the eye can see. And of course you can play it around, or you can play around counter magic and stuff like that too, fairly easy. Like obviously they'll need a counter spell, not like a spell starter sprite, unless they have 3 fairies in play already or something. So pretty sweet card. Definitely pretty underrated. I like this a lot in Ravnica draft, so RGD. It was good. It was definitely one of those things that was not the most exciting card, but like you would play it in decks, and it would sometimes be pretty good. Obviously, there's a lot more multicolor stuff in Ravnica block, but definitely a pretty sweet card, and definitely one I like to play. So there you go. All right, now we get to some really great stuff. Of course, we'll just talk about the removal real quick, which would be Lightning Bolt and Trickery and Abrade. Most of these decks play 3 to 4 bolts, as you can see, as well as typically a lot of them just play a Abrade, and an Electrickery. I mean, pretty much all the stuff I've said about these cards, or at least Electrickery in the past, applies here. It's one-sided board wipe, tons of 1 toughness creatures, really great. Obviously, you don't really want to play too many of these effects because there's a lot of decks, say something like Tron, other decks like Boggles, I'll just say Boggles, things like that it can just be super dead and not really do anything. And then Bolt is just a good card in general. But we have Faithless Looting. This is a very good sort of spell. This isn't something you really want to fire off on turn 1, typically. I mean, it depends on what you have in your hand, but you'll want to play, out your dorks and stuff first. But Faithless Looting can, it can be like just a one mana draw too with things like Battle Screech and Prismatic Strands because they are kind of expensive. Especially, it can be better to just get them into the graveyard so you can flash them back immediately and then also get 2 new cards. And again, late game flashing this back is great because, well, you can get rid of random lands, dead cards to draw fresh new cards. So very, very, very good here. And of course, all the stuff I said about Prismatic Strands and Battle Screech, its cards are awesome. Its card advantage, sort of, it gives you a bunch of tokens. Prismatic Strands is like a pseudo one-sided fog, can stop, I mean, what do you think? It can stop any sort of damage from a colored source, so there's tons of different stuff. You one-sided fog for alpha strikes, burn spells, whether they be red or black or whatever, all sorts of different things. And of course, when you cast it and then just sits in your graveyard is pretty difficult to deal with for some decks. So yeah, definitely pretty sweet here. And of course, Rally the Peasants, another powerful flashback card. But it's a great way to alpha strike because you'll have a bunch of flyers from like Battle Screech and Suntail Hawk. Ah, boy, too much judgment. But from all your flyers and stuff like that, Rally the Peasants is quite good with a bunch of evasive flying creatures or just having a very wide board, and having flashback is just awesome. Abrade is nice too, just another piece of removal as well as another piece of artifact destruction. So it's sort of like pre-boarding a little bit for things like Affinity or whatnot. So yeah, pretty good stuff here. Okay, and now we have enchantments, but these enchantments are basically just part of the removal suite. So we got, of course, the Journey to Nowhere, very sweet card, typically played as a 3-up as you can see, and then Oblivion Ring, which is, some people play it in addition to Journey to Nowhere, so 2 journeys, 1 O-Ring, or just 3 journeys, like the deck we just looked at above. I think I'd rather just play Journey for the most part, but of course Oblivion Ring gives you a little bit more flexibility, which is pretty nice too, right? So that's kind of sweet. It is a little bit more expensive, which I'm not a huge fan of, because the deck already plays some more expensive-ish cards, so I think I'd rather just play 3 Journey. But O-Ring is good, it's a nice sort of catch-all. It's well, non-land permanents, of course, so it can get nab artifacts and enchantments and stuff like that. So definitely something to consider. But yeah, nothing too weird here. These are just strong cards, and pretty unlikely people are going to be bringing in enchantment removal specifically for these. So this is mostly like it's not like a Doomblade or a Terror exactly, but it is pretty good, and it is semi-permanent. Alright, these are lands. This deck didn't actually, the one I had listed didn't actually play Forgotten Cave, it just played 2 Secluded Steppes. But you can, switch them up, 1 of each or whatever. It's not a huge deal. Of course, Boros Garrison is pretty good. Will let you buy back your Steppes, Forgotten Caves, and or Ash Barrens too, which is nice. And it's kind of, because you have a little bit of a higher curve, Boros Garrison being giving you more mana during the end game is quite nice. Deck is really mana hungry. Again, basic lands, blah 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 blah. Ash Barrens, yep, this is a multicolor deck, and of course Windscarred Crag is the more or less the best sort of common tap dual land for this sort of thing. The extra life is nice in certain situations, but of course it's mostly just played for the mana fixing. Okay, now we have the sideboard. And, well, what do we got? Well, we got Dust to Dust, Electrickery, Relic of Progenitus, and Pyroblast. Yeah, this is mostly pretty obvious. Dust to Dust against Affinity, Electrickery against anything with a bunch of 1 toughness creatures, so things like Affinity or Fairies. Relic of Progenitus, anything that uses the graveyard like the Cycle Storm decks. Pyroblast against decks with blue cards, right? I think that's pretty obvious. And of course, same thing, REB, also against blue decks. Leave No Trace against Enchantments or Bogles. Bogles, basically. Boggles? Whatever. Revoke Existence, again, card against artifacts and or enchantment decks. Flaring Pain against things like Moment's Peace. And Parapet against -1/-1 effects. All right. So the nice thing, of course, about this deck is that it can grind pretty well, right? Monarch is very good, having a bunch of creatures with that you can just put on the board, and then Monarch means that like your creatures just sort of matter less, and just having stuff in play and doing things is very good because the more turns you get, even if it's just random creatures blocking or whatever, it gives you more cards and things like that. And if you're able to just trade 1 for 1 with your opponent, you'll eventually outdraw them, and yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, So that's pretty sweet. Lots of good stuff going on there. Monarch very well supported in this deck. Again, all the flashback stuff is very sweet. Again, good synergy with Faithless Looting. Oh my gosh, my words don't work today. Lots of good removal, right? With Journey to Nowhere, as well as Bolt and such. Of course, all the sideboard cards too. Did I mention Monarch? Because it's pretty good in this deck. Imagine just hanging around with your little Guardian of the Guild Pact, just hanging out, being all awesome and hard to kill, and just drawing cards every turn. That sounds like something I want to do every day. Very sweet. And just good sideboard. Like I said, good sideboard. It's really nice just having a good flexible sideboard with tons of powerful, flexible, versatile cards. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. I am a big fan. But that's it. That's it. This deck is sweet. It's another really cool Pauper deck. Definitely one of the more popular Pauper decks. One of the cooler ones. I like playing red-white decks. I got a big Battlefield Forge thing. I like playing red-white. I like Goblin Legionnaire. Man, that card is sweet. Lots of cool stuff. You can't really go wrong with Boros. So yeah. So yeah, but not much else going on here. Lots of really really cool stuff going on. Uh, metagame just shifted again, right? Because of the bannings and all this and that and the other. But everything looks pretty sweet. So there you go. So yeah, thanks for stopping by, guys, and have a great day.